Ooh,
We're up.
all right. So what name did we settle on? Remember last episode we spent the first couple minutes like talking over names.
We did. I think Clash of Cinema is where we're going right now. So
Clash of Cinema.
talking
All
about
right.
the two opposing sides of moviedom,
Mm-hmm.
what that's
It's
all
true.
about.
Yeah. And then the question, I guess to start here today is whether or not we're on the same side or opposing sides for this film.
That's true. We're probably talking about one of the most divisive films of the last decade for sure. Um,
2016, and it's weird too because we've had two other movies in this franchise since then. So I
mhm.
think I think sometimes people try to like forget that this came out because we've for
I
lack
think.
of a better term had real sequels.
Mhm.
So
Yep. So yeah, so we're talking Ghostbusters 2016, which
Ghostbusters 2016.
which starred the female actresses, Melissa McCarthy, Kristen
Hmm.
Wiig, uh, Leslie Jones, and Kate McKinnon were the
Hmm.
four.
And the receptionist was Chris Hemsworth.
Chris Hemsworth, yes, who was fresh off Thor, in the
Hmm.
Avengers at that time. So he
Yeah.
was,
He
pretty
would
well.
he would have had a he probably would have had a couple, right? And then like
Mhm.
I think Thor was like 2010,
Yes, I
Avengers
believe
was
so.
like 2012, and then
Mhm.
we might have even had Dark World by then too.
Yes,
Dark World might have been like 14.
yeah, I think it was a couple years after.
So somebody
And I
called
think,
him up and
I
said
think at this
like,
point we had two Avengers. I think 2015 was Avengers 2, if I'm not mistaken.
all right, so he had four outings as Thor, and then they just called him up and were like, "Do you want to do something that's totally not remotely serious at all?" And he's like, "Sure." He's like, "I don't need the money. Tell me what it is."
I'm in. Apparently, him and Paul Feig, the director, had the same agent, and that's how
Mm-hmm.
he knew Chris Hemsworth was interested in the movie. So he,
Mm-hmm.
he kind of already had an idea and an inkling that he wanted to do it. So he kind of invited him in, and he he was he was in. He got in pretty quick. So
Mm.
it
I
was an
wonder
interesting
who else
choice.
do you think would have like been able to fit that role at the time?
Hmm. I mean, what they were going for, very, kind of playing on against type. Usually
Hmm.
have a woman secretary, this and that. So they're like, let's try to play against that, make the guy a little dopey. You
Yeah.
need somebody that can carry something like that. They got to be charming.
Yeah.
Uh, that's a tough thing. So I think if you could probably find a good comic actor that could probably pull it off. Um, hmm.
What's funny too was like he was like the way he played that was very much like an airheaded jock
Mhm.
versus actual like Janine Malnitz, which she wasn't like dumb. She was like an
No,
intelligent person. It was just she
she
just
was
wasn't,
feisty.
yeah, but she just wasn't a scientist. So like
No,
compared to, the guys running around the firehouse, she might not have seemed as smart.
right, right. She wasn't that book smart, but she was the street
Yeah.
smart. It's
Sure, and Hemsworth just comes off like a pretty
he's
face and there's nothing going on upstairs.
nothing at all. He's an
Right.
absolute 100
I
percent.
I I mean to the point where like he's like basically an open vessel for when the villain wants to like hop in at the end.
Right, take yeah, body possession. Well, yeah,
Hmm.
which was interesting. Now, let me ask you this, because there's two
Hmm.
versions of this movie that are out. Uh,
Ooh,
the theatrical and the extended. Which one did you watch? Were you?
I watched Extended.
So did I. So did I.
Mm. All
Which
right.
which is preferable if I'm watching.
Mm.
I like the
I I almost think maybe I should have watched both just so I know what the difference is because I don't know if I've ever watched the regular theatrical. If I'm if
the
that could explain some of the controversy around this,
the
if it's
big
not as
difference
good.
is the dance number. That's one of the things that was cut
Really?
for version. Yes.
Huh.
That's why
That.
if you watch the credits, it's
Mm,
showcased a lot in there because at the time they didn't have it in the movie, so they kind of put it in towards the end, just to show
that
that
makes
they.
sense.
But there's about 15 minutes that they added in to the extended one. So
Sometimes that's make or break.
yeah, 100%. Well, let me preface this too by saying that I'm a huge fan of the original Ghostbusters.
Yeah,
1984,
same.
saw it in theaters, one of my top favorite comedies of all time.
Hmm.
Wonderful. I'm a fan of the sequel, Ghostbusters 2. I know that one has a little bit of a, controversy there at times, but I loved it as a kid. I was
Hmm.
15 when it came out, so I was pretty psyched to see it.
Yeah.
Um, so watching this, I mean, obviously there's, a trail of controversy and just disdain for this movie that have
Mm,
kind of lagged it and dogged it for years,
right.
since even before its release. I mean, the minute the trailer hit, it became the most disliked trailer on YouTube to date. Um,
Wow. I
yeah.
I didn't know that, but that's very interesting. I and it's tough too because like being almost a decade old, I'm trying to think of like something that I might have seen in recent memory that would have given me like the same maybe visceral reaction that people had at the time.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and I think I think another movie, and we'll probably get to this one, is like The Last Jedi is probably a good parallel of a movie that gets a lot of that hate. Like the fans just hate it, just with this seething passion of hatred
which is
towards.
I which is ironic because of like I can hear I can think of like specific things that people have told me about the middle one that they dislike vehemently, like, oh man, different director, Casino Planet, etc. But
Mhm.
I'm sure we could like you said, we could have an entire episode about just that too. So
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. But so not see, I haven't seen this movie
mhm.
before this episode. I had not seen it in probably about 4 years, I think.
Okay.
Um, I think the last time I watched it was right before Afterlife came out.
Mm.
So it was like that summer. I just kind of was getting prepped for
Yeah,
watching.
you're having like you get like a little Ghostbuster bug kind of bite
Yeah.
you.
So yeah, kind of seeing everything, watching it all and prepping for it. Then once Afterlife came
Hmm.
out, you kind of got swept into that legacy sequel. It was really it was exciting. You got to see all the favorite characters return. And it was a
Hmm.
fun story. Really paid
Yeah.
homage to the original, and a lot of tips to the hat to what we loved about the original. So I think I was, and I was really psyched when they said, "Oh, we're making Frozen Empire." So I was really,
Mm.
that one come out. So I kind of,
Yeah.
it's not that I was ignoring this one, but I just, it kind of got pushed aside, and I was like, "Oh, I'll watch it at some point." So when we decided,
Sure.
I was like, "All right, let me watch it." So I'm kind of watching it with fresh eyes because it's been so
Hmm.
long. Say I had a blast watching it. It was a
Did you?
lot of fun. I really did. I enjoyed the hell out of it more than I thought I
Mm.
would. Being
So
as long as I've seen it.
yeah. So just to give a little bit of context on my perspective on this one. So I've seen it twice now, and I mean I saw it for the first time last year.
Okay.
And I as a Ghostbusters person, I didn't I don't know what I was doing in and around 2016 that I didn't see this. I definitely like see a lot more movies now, but it might have just fallen through the cracks. And by the time I'd heard about it, there was like all the vitriol surrounding it, and I was like, it's not like I'll never watch this, but I there's no rush to watch it because
Sure.
it's essentially its own thing. So you know what I mean? Like it's not like I need to watch this to get into these new legacy sequels or
Mhm.
things like that.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, like, I wish I could say I grew up seeing these on the big screen. Like, for me, the I think my relationship with Ghostbusters started with Extreme Ghostbusters, and then
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
backfilled from there after being like,
Mhm.
oh wow, like they had these episodes where they brought in the originals to help fight like a really massive threat, and I'm like, these seem really
Great
cool. Let me go
episodes.
back and watch them, and then I watched one, and then two, and then real Ghostbusters, and then like there's all kinds of expanded material, like
Mhm.
so many comic series. They even had a video game at one point
Yep.
that was a sequel to two, and you play as an
Yep.
unnamed rookie. And I
Yes.
think they said at the time that that's what the plot they would have used for a third one,
Yes.
as close as they could get.
Hmm.
Um, but I circling back, I also very much enjoyed watching this. I don't know if I'm just
Mhm.
a glutton for punishment or I just don't see the the bad that I mean like it's not like the best Ghostbusters movie, but it's also not like, like oh my god, this is so bad I can never watch it again kind of thing.
I think a lot of issues going into this movie
Mhm.
is this inability to separate it from the original. So
Mhm.
we're predisposed to just say, okay, it's not the original. What's wrong with it? Why don't I like it like I like the original?
Right.
If you can kind of separate it and just watch it for what it is, it's
Sure.
100% entertaining. Um,
Yeah.
I I find all the actors charming. So I loved every scene with Leslie Jones. She every time she's on screen, I'm laughing. She was a lot of fun to watch. All the
Mhm.
other characters are great. I even really thought the plot was well done. I
Mhm.
hear a lot of people the story was bad or lazy writing, whatever. But I'm like, it really wasn't. They have this character that's he wants to open up the spirit world and unleash them on New York, and he was just really this loner, depressed guy that read their book and said, I'm gonna
I mean,
you
it,
know
it
uh, uh
it
crazy.
definitely draws parallels to the originals. I mean,
Of
like,
course.
the original had like specific like villains that, like
Mhm.
the humans were worshiping or, trying to get power from. And in this one, it was, I mean, maybe in some regard, that's what people, could have been pointing out to for the lazy rating.
Sure.
And not saying that it was, but like
Mhm.
maybe just like
Yeah.
I'm gonna just draw from the spirit world,
Mhm.
no rhyme, no reason, and hope to become like a ghost god.
Right.
And
And of course,
as opposed to like channeling Zool or Gozer
right.
or whoever.
And he still becomes the large monster at the end, and that sort of thing. And
There are parallels for sure that like I'm sure people will be like, oh, like this or that, Ecto One, Firehouse.
mhm.
But
Right.
the other way to look at that is they're part of the same franchise, and it might feel weird without those things.
I think it would. Yeah, I think not having Firehouse, not having an
Hmm.
ectomobile, all of those things are.
Hmm.
And I think all you have to have the uniforms, you have to have the logo. Like there's certain
Hmm.
things that are required to really make it work for that
Yeah,
series.
just imagine if we'd gotten Afterlife with no car and like
Right.
no jumpsuits, like
Hmm.
because it was already far removed from the settings that we like know and love for them. And then they like inject the familiarity, and we're like, all right, we're watching the Ecto One driving down the streets of the middle of nowhere. Great.
Right. And I think that's something too. And I was thinking as I'm watching this, and I think maybe this is something that people, we're kind of problematic towards is that the first film is very like it's straight to the point. It gets us right into here's these guys, they get fired, they're now starting this business. Boom, they're right into this business. We know the threat. Everything's really set up very quickly and
Yeah.
clearly. This movie took a little more time to build that up. So
Hmm.
the relationships were a little bit more strained in the beginning. Where in the first film they're all together, so they just continue together. Here they have to get them together, and
Yeah.
then they're figuring out, oh, what are we going to do? How are we going to catch the ghost? They get the equipment. They sort of testing the equipment and trying all that stuff out. That was all stuff that wasn't done in the first film, so it
Sure.
sort of lagged it. They're like, let's get right
And
to
I
the point. We
mean,
want to see the ghost, but
and in a way they had to like world build their own way so they could separate themselves from the
Mhm.
other movies, or else if all they were girl
What they
versions
wanted
of
to do.
existing characters, then why watch it?
Right. Yeah. If it was the same
So
thing, yeah. And I liked how they changed the equipment. They gave them more stuff, not just the proton packs and the traps. You
yeah.
had, these pistols and they had, the like brass knuckle things and stuff. I thought that was a lot of fun. Just
Yeah.
to give them more.
Yeah.
I enjoyed how they used the proton streams to kind of pull the ghosts and throw them around as opposed to just holding them there and putting them into the trap. It was like more of almost like a whip. And I thought that was a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
I think that had already kind of been expanded on a little bit in some of the other like things besides one and two, but it was definitely cool to see it on the big screen. Like, because I want to say that I'd seen stuff like that in the cartoons as well. Where like the
Yeah, we
stream was.
even in the game, you would like slam the ghosts with it and like
Yeah,
weaken the ghost.
yeah.
Yeah, there was things that were done, kind of in that sense.
I
Um,
think I just to like give you a little parallel here. I think my favorite was Kristen Wiig,
mhm.
um, and I didn't even realize at the time, like I sometimes I just see characters and actors and I'm like, they look familiar, but I don't know why. And I
Mhm.
realized after, oh, that's Weird Barbie. I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah. You had a lot of yeah. You had Kate McKinnon was great. Melissa McCarthy was
mhm.
great, but I really enjoyed their chemistry. I thought they had a lot of really good, and I think that's another thing too is they tried to find them counterparts to the original. Like Kristen Wiig is the Venkman, and
Yeah,
McCarthy's like their stance, and but they're still trying to establish them as different than those characters.
sure.
Like
Yeah.
that kind of makes people mad because they're like, that's not the character I want. I want Peter Venkman. I want, you know.
I think that was a no win situation though,
Mhm.
because again, if they were just 100% carbon copies but with female parts, people would say, oh well, all you did was copy Bankman. Why
Yeah,
can't you be like you're gonna get somebody on one side upset and you're gonna make one person happy. It's
right.
just no matter
Yeah.
what.
Now, something that's always I've always thought about with this film is now, say for instance, like just somebody said, hey, I'm going to recut this movie. And
Hmm.
instead of the way it is now, they're going to say, I'm going to recut it. So instead of them being they're starting from scratch, they're like, hey, what if we franchise it? We're Ghostbusters Boston instead.
Yeah.
Or you think that would have made people embrace it more? Or do you think they still would have been like, no, nope.
So funny you say that, right? And I don't know how much of the IDW comics did you read?
I've just about everything. I've read quite a bit.
They did that in one of the runs where it was almost
Mhm.
like Ghostbusters Incorporated, and it was,
Yes.
if I remember right, what had happened was they had kind of taken all these different characters that had been introduced in random stories here and there
Mhm.
and made them like the teams that either
Mhm.
they replaced the
Yes.
Ghostbusters when they weren't around, or when they came back, they
Mhm.
became like the auxiliary members in other places. Like
Right.
one of them was like a Hispanic FBI agent, and like Kylie like ends up being a real character there, and just stuff like that. So
Yep.
I think that's not a bad idea, but I guess that really would have needed to be the intention going into it, not just an afterthought, because it really felt like they were kind of building their own universe, and like to do that is probably something they decided after the fact. They're like, this didn't really land on its own. Let's tell people it was really part of the bigger universe.
Right. I think too that at the time, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken, they had been, Ghostbusters 3 had been kind of lagging in developmental health for so long. Because
Yeah,
if I remember correctly, I know the script that was reflected of the video game around the late 90s, the budget that Dan Aykroyd had pitched back was like 150 million, which at the time
yeah,
was just
you're too
astronomical.
high. Yeah,
Yeah. So they were like, no, we're not doing that. And I think it kind of killed that. And then they tried again, like about 10 years later. And again, it just didn't come to fruition. So that's when the game came out. And then it just kind of froze from there. So I think Columbia was like, let's just make a new one. Let's just start over and see
we
what
don't
we
have to we don't have to worry about like the old heads, and just see where we can go with the name
can.
that we own the rights to.
And that's a ballsy move because you're taking something that was so beloved and really trying to
Hmm.
reinvent it and
Hmm.
hope that those fans will embrace it. And that's a huge,
Hmm.
that's a tall order for any
I,
fan.
I I think in a weird way they got what they wanted, but also didn't,
Mhm.
because obviously the reaction to this, despite whether we like it, or it's like a cult hit but not really a successful box office hit, it
Right.
probably got the gears turning to get Afterlife to happen within the 5 years that it happened, because they're like, there
Yes.
is an appetite for this, but not there's an appetite for this, but not this. You know?
Right. Yes, 100%. Actually, Afterlife was supposed to be out in 2019, but got pushed back because of COVID. Or no,
Oh,
2020.
2020. Yeah, yeah.
2020. And then COVID hit, and so they pushed it a year and a half almost back.
Hmm.
So it
It
lagged.
was just sitting in the can probably.
Yeah. But so yeah, it took a little while. But once it came out, I think it whetted that appetite that
Hmm.
that fandom had. They've been
Yeah.
wanting, you know, they wanted
I
that.
yeah, and it was weird too because then after that when we got like the announcement for Frozen Empire, I
Mhm.
kind of thought to myself like that this one was gonna almost do better than Afterlife because they were giving us an entirely new enemy because even with Afterlife they're like, okay, not only are we giving you back the Ghostbusters that you like, but we're giving you the same enemy again. I'm like, really? We couldn't move on to somebody
Right.
else? And
Yeah.
then Frozen Empire gave us something else, and I get the sense that that one was not as well received as Afterlife.
It was not. Yeah. I mean, I think it did. Box office was okay. It wasn't,
Yeah.
you know, blowing up, but
Hmm.
the reaction was lukewarm by some fans. But I must say that I've always wanted to see more inside the firehouse. I always felt I never got
Hmm.
enough in the movies. And that
Hmm.
gave me a lot. And I was really kind of satisfied with seeing a lot of the action and a lot of the story take place in the firehouse. Um,
Right.
because that's one thing I always loved about the cartoon is you got to see them in that element.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
the movies are always out. They're always out here doing this and that. I always love those scenes where they're in the firehouse because then you can kind of see that sort of core
Hmm.
relationship, and then how they were really dealing with the problems. How are we going to solve this and solve that? And it was like those were the
Mm.
scenes that I always really liked in the cartoon. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, in this one.
Unfortunate. I was just saying, unfortunately or fortunately, living through the '90s, we got a lot of like spin-offs from like beloved films
Yep.
that like went so much farther than their film counterparts ever could, and
Yep.
it definitely set like a way too high bar for some things like the
It's true.
Beetlejuice cartoon, Mask cartoon, like all these things were just like so much like better than anything you could ask for, and then it's like how could you do more after that if you're not
Right.
doing the same thing as those,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
It's
And
seriously. They
and the
really
Ghostbusters cartoon was no exception.
A
So.
100%. Yeah. To me, it just if when I we weren't getting any more Ghostbusters movie, the cartoon always just filled that void for me because it
Hmm.
had all the elements that I loved right there.
Hmm.
The writing was always brilliant. J. Michael
Hmm.
Straczynski being one of the key writers on that, has written some great
Yeah.
other shows over the years, um, is what made that really, I think, so good.
Hmm.
So that's a hard, to be able to say, all right, we had a great movie. Here's a spin-off cartoon that's equally as great.
Yeah.
It's hard to keep to that momentum to keep going. So anybody that tries to kind of capture that, it's a lot. It's tall order. Tall
Yeah.
order.
I mean, like for any of those shows to get more than like 2 or 3 seasons was
Mhm.
great, but like it's just not realistic because they're trying to capture the attention span of like kids who had seen the accompanying film, and
Mhm.
it's like, okay, well, 3 years later, this kid is just went from 6 to 9, and maybe they're doing other stuff now. Oh crap!
Yeah,
All right, well, time to jump to the next tie-in to the next movie that's
right.
hot
Yeah.
on the screen. So.
Yeah. But
Well.
even the influence of that show was seen in the second movie. I mean, they put a lot of the same, like, I mean, Slimer became so,
Mm-hmm.
prevalent as a character in there, for
Yeah. Oh
laughs.
yeah.
But it was because of the cartoon. He became so popular in that he needed to be
Yeah.
there. Like now
Mm-hmm.
if they don't have him in the movie, it's like, wait, where's
You're like,
Slimer?
what? Yeah. What happened?
Yeah. So even in
And
20,
or they give you something that's like Reddit, like reminds you of Slimer at the very least. Like I remember in I don't remember. Was he in Afterlife? I remember seeing like there was another big gray blobby thing that
yeah,
like kind of reminded me of Slimer.
yeah, there was a Muncher, I think was his name they called him. But yeah, he was
Yeah, yeah.
sort of the same concept as Slimer. But and then
They're like
Empire,
it was the hey look at me ghost.
yes. Yep. And then but Frozen Empire they dumped Slimer like here we go. There's the
Hmm.
the full thing. But yeah, and 2016 they give you some Slimer jokes, all that stuff was there.
Hmm.
So it helped, really elevate
Yeah.
that connection to the original for me in that sense.
Are
But
there any other major controversial things that you think about like 2016 that maybe we haven't, mentioned yet?
um, I'm thinking too, like, 'cause I was reading a lot of trivia on it and things that were kind of like, so when it underperformed, I know a
Hmm.
lot of things, like even Dan Aykroyd, who had, he'd produced the film and he was in the film with a cameo. He had come out and said, well, he had suggested a lot of scenes that they should have filmed that they didn't film because the director said we don't need them. Then they had to go back
Hmm.
and reshoot them because they did need them, and he said it
Hmm.
cost more and all this. But in reality, I guess some of that was he inflated the cost of those. So
Hmm.
there was a little rift that kind of erupted between him and Paul Feig, the director, but he's come out and apologized about that. And, um, but I think
Dan Aykroyd did or Paul Feig did?
Dan Aykroyd apologized to Paul Feig
Oh.
for his comments, saying that, and he said the film was good. He
Mm.
since is tries to elevate that film, I think, and
Mm.
because I think it's its own thing at this point, and you kind of have to look at it that way. It's not connected to the other four movies. It's its own thing. So how can you separate it? Can you sit and watch it and enjoy it on its own
Hmm.
type of thing? Um,
I I
okay.
think if we accept the multiverse theory, then you can, because you can just say it's another universe.
Yeah, and I almost would like to see those actors cameo in a Ghostbuster film. Like maybe
Sure.
not as the same ones, but it's kind of like Bill Murray did in the 2016 and Dan Aykroyd did.
Yeah.
Let's see Kristen Wiig kind of appear in this one, or Melissa McCarthy.
Hmm.
I would love that just for that sort of thing. But I think they're the
I
film,
mean, they could even have them in it like as
right,
that universe's version of their
right.
characters.
Yeah,
Maybe they're still teaching at Columbia instead of
yeah.
having gotten fired.
Mhm. Something like
So,
that would be great. Um,
mhm.
yeah, but I think filmmakers are still kind of hesitant because of there's still that pushback from that fandom, just to say, they don't, it's hard to get a beat on exactly why people hate it. Because there's not, I never really get a clear, like, a
Yeah.
description of like specifics of why they hate
Yeah.
it. Like, I hated the character, I hate the writing, it's not
I,
funny.
I, I I mean, there's the one elephant in the room that we can definitely tackle, which I'm not, I don't ascribe to this or agree with it, but it's, the view in general that people, have this view of like male protagonists, and then they
Mhm,
got all female
mhm.
protagonists, regardless
Sure.
of who the actors were, race, age, any of that stuff. But they were just like, you replaced men with women, and we are mad, you
Hmm.
know, details
Yep.
be damned.
Right.
And I think, whether, the people that are upset by it are going to openly admit it or not, I imagine that some subsection of the upset people are upset for that reason.
I
Just
100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the same kind of mentality that you get from the people that are like, I didn't like She-Hulk because She-Hulk
Mhm.
is a woman hero, and you're kind of just like, okay, so would you prefer they did male She-Hulk, or just more Hulk, or
Isn't that Hulk?
where yeah, where are you, what version of this would you be okay with?
Mhm. Right, right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, I know she got a lot of beef for that show, and which blew my mind because I enjoyed it very much.
I
Uh,
did too, and I mean, I get we're in that weird like
mhm.
tipping point where maybe we've gotten too many like MCU shows. Like there was a point
Mhm.
in time where we had nothing, so now
Mhm.
we have so many that it's okay to
Right.
openly critique everything
Finally
about them.
bashed.
But
Well, even in that same vein of the female protagonist. I mean, I remember when Captain Marvel hit. That was there was a lot of controversy about just Brie
Hmm.
Larson, about
Hmm.
just her character, Carol Danvers.
I I imagine we could have an entire episode for that one too.
I'm sure we
Um,
could. Yeah.
uh, all I'll really say about that is the only major difference between her and this version of Ghostbusters is I think Brie Larson was given some opportunities to speak on her own behalf, and she may have fueled her own fire.
Right.
Versus Ghostbusters, which were just kind of like, we're here, we exist, and people just reacted to that, with nothing. They didn't even have to say anything. People were just reacting.
Yeah. Yeah, they were.
But but again, we could. I mean, I'm sure we could literally do a Captain Marvel slash like the Marvels episode if we
Yeah.
wanted.
Well, I'm sure we could.
Yep.
It's true. Yeah. That's probably one of the first, well, I guess one of the first Marvel ones that kind of hit that. It was either that or Dark World would be one of the first ones that hit that sort of, where are we at? Is this what we want for the Marvel Universe type thing? So yeah, we could,
I mean, yeah. Dark World's weird. I mean, like, I get that the name is Dark World, but that whole movie was like shot like with like dark lens, and I'm just kind of like this, like everything that's happening in this movie is dark. Even the supposed good parts,
hmm.
like it just all feels very somber.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, although that I think that's also the same one that we had Stellan Skarsgård running around naked in the UK. So,
yes, yep. That's
yep, that's its own
crazy.
controversy.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt.
Mm.
I'm trying to think. So, back on the Ghostbuster topic, but
Hmm.
so some of the things that I thought were interesting too that they did differently was the relationship city officials was interesting in
I
this one.
I
So,
was thinking the same thing just before we started recording when I was looking at some of my notes
yep,
about like what we could talk about. So I'm happy that you have the same thought.
yeah, I found this to be fascinating because like in the first film, obviously, there's the EPA, Walter Peck thing. Then the mayor,
Walter Peck.
oh, what a great character he was in that. And even to see him back in Frozen Empire was wonderful too.
Hmm.
But you had Andy Garcia as the mayor and Cecily Strong as his assistant that were kind of on one side to the media saying, this is ridiculous stuff, whatever.
Hmm.
And on the other side saying, we need your help, which I thought was a really cool dynamic to create
It
that.
was it was almost like they learned from the Walter Peck mistake of like, okay, I'm in government and there's no. I mean, he was also like probably a skeptic, so that
Mhm.
didn't help. But like he could have taken them at their word and you know and then
Mhm.
still thrown them to the wolves, in public conversation
Right. Yeah.
to save the city. But rather than do that, he was like, you guys are wrong and I'm gonna bust into your firehouse and like mess around with your
Mhm.
stuff. and
Yep.
and then in Frozen Empire he does it again, and I'm like,
Yes.
do you ever learn?
Nope.
But no, you're right. In 2016, like the city officials were like, we're gonna hand you guys money on the down low, but
Mhm.
don't talk to us in public. We're not friends.
Yeah. Right. Which I thought was really cool at the end when they're like, hey, you can have whatever you want. We're going to fully
Yeah,
fund you to keep
yeah.
investigating this stuff, but we are not associated with you in public. Publicly we don't have any connection. I thought that was a
You've been
really cool.
disavowed.
Yeah, I thought that was a
Mm-hmm.
really neat way to establish that. Plus, that gave him the firehouse, and that
Mm-hmm.
was always kind of a fun little like, hey, they didn't just. It's not just here, hand it to us, we're moving in, and boom. They they had to work a little harder to get to some of
Mm-hmm.
these levels than in the first film, which I thought was a lot of fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. True. I'm trying to think if there's any other like major stuff. I think one of the other things that I noticed when I watched the movie, and I'm not sure, I didn't look up to see like what kind of like fan thoughts or comments there were on this, but I could imagine that these existed. The ghosts in 2016 are, I don't know if it's the CGI and just the way they made them look or like how they interacted, but you don't take them as seriously. I mean, like there are ghosts in the originals that were actually kind of scary,
Yeah.
and then some were funny. I mean, like it just kind of depended. But I got like the sense that the general dynamic was that they were, you looked at them and you weren't really that scared, and
Mhm.
you were kind of like, oh wow, they're like kind of going on a parade march through the city. I kind of would go with them.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So
There definitely was less of a threat in this one than in
yeah,
like I
or
felt
at
like
the
this.
very least, the perception of the threat wasn't there. I mean,
Yeah.
like they told you like, oh man, if you don't stop this, this guy's gonna become like
Right.
a ghost god and take over. But like you're kind of like, is
Yeah, the stakes felt less higher in this one than they felt in the first film. Like you felt like, oh man, they gotta stop Gozer. I
he?
mean,
Hmm.
you could see it. It's taking the crowds are gathering and they're all like cheering on the Ghostbusters. It felt like, okay, we we need you guys to save the day. This is like, this is a big thing. But in this one, it felt like it was very underground. They're running it by on foot trying to figure out what's happening and trying to do this, so it definitely felt like it wasn't as as monumental as it felt in the first film.
Agreed.
And maybe that's a critique that you could take from it, that
Hmm.
turned people off, is that it felt like, in the first film the Ghostbusters were really celebrated. I mean, as soon as they
Hmm.
bust that first ghost at the Cedric Hotel, they're on the
Hmm.
news, they're all
Yeah.
over the papers. It's a huge thing. In
Uh-huh.
2016, nothing. There wasn't any real celebration of them till the very end
Yeah.
credits, when they go on the roof and she's like, you see all the buildings that are lit up. That was the
Yeah.
first you really got to see that there was
Like
impact.
yeah, an acknowledgement from like the public at large.
Yeah, yeah, and I think
It.
that's a big drawback on that.
Mm. Funny thing I was going to mention too, I didn't even think about it. So when I was hosting trivia earlier, I mean, I don't write the questions. I get them given to me by the
Mhm.
company that makes them. But there was actually a Ghostbuster question tonight, and I slipped my mind till now. And it was about what type of building the what was the type of building that the first ghost they captured was in, and it's almost like a trick question because everybody automatically like hears first ghost and their
Mhm.
brain ran right to the library, and I'm like,
Right.
but they didn't catch that ghost.
Catch that one. Right.
Nope. And they caught their first ghost in the hotel,
Cedric, yeah.
and that was the correct answer, and it stumped everybody because I'm like, you
Yeah.
got to pay attention to those words, man, they'll
Yeah.
throw you.
That's true. It's like kind of like a Jeopardy. You really got to listen to that clue or you're not going to get it right.
There was one or two people that missed it. Like, there's an
Yeah.
option called doubling down where you can
Yep.
like mark a double down and double your score, but if you miss
Mhm.
anything when you double down, it's a zero. And there was some people that were like, "What? I missed that." And I'm like, "Yep, they did not catch a damn thing in the library,
That's right.
except for the wrath of the librarian." That's
Exactly. 100%. Yeah,
so. Yep.
it's true. Now, now, so thinking about like, so that thing about that, I don't, if you sit and watch the credits to it in this,
Mhm.
referring back to that one moment where they get the accolades at the end. If
Yeah.
you keep watching to the very end, there's that reference where she's listening to the tapes. Leslie Jones,
Zool.
the Zool. So I'm guessing the second movie would have given us the Gozer,
Their version, yeah.
thing, which I wonder if they would have made it a man, to kind of just counter the first film.
I kind of, but then like, and I mean, it came after, so we'll never know. But
Mhm.
Afterlife did that, right? Wasn't
Mhm.
or was that Gozer that ended up being a
Mhm.
female the second in
Yes.
that one?
Yep.
Okay.
They made her look very similar to the first film.
Yeah, I mean, like with stuff like that too, like with these like immortal beings, like I kind of think that gender is sort of irrelevant. It's
Right.
like whatever will get them into the solid world is what they care about.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So
So maybe
well,
that would have been the
ma-
appeal.
I was gonna say, or maybe they could have flip flopped it, right? Like was it so if Gozer looked more like a woman, they would have made Gozer look like a man.
Mhm.
And then what was the one in the second movie? The one in the painting.
Vigo, Vigo the Carpathian.
Vigo. So Vigo would have had to have been like Viga the Carpathian, and then made it a woman.
Right. Which have been like some vicious, totalitarian dictator from
Mm-hmm.
the 60s.
Or maybe they do the whole multiversal thing where it's like there's only one version of this character across the multiverse, and now
That
they're
would
like,
be cool.
okay, so when they get trapped into the like the containment unit and kind of put back in the ghost zone, maybe they get to travel to other realities. Like, oh well, I can't get
Interesting.
what I want here, so you know,
It's an interesting theory if that were true. It's almost
yeah,
like how you could connect those movies together. You could think of like how could we
hmm
take a villain from one and they could create a new one and do that same thing and
sure,
have overlap and
hmm
bring those characters back. And I wonder if the world I don't even I'd like to say would they be ready for it, but I almost think that fandom is just completely turned off to that film for the most, which is
yeah,
and I think
mhm.
and I think for me, even if after the first time I saw it, I didn't hate it the first time I saw it, but it didn't.
Yeah,
I wasn't like, oh, Ghostbusters is
yeah,
bad. I was kind of like, okay, that was fun. But I
hmm
think Afterlife and Frozen Empire, kind of getting that satisfied, scratching that itch for that legacy sequel, going back and watching this again really made me enjoy it more, because I can appreciate it now as its
yeah,
own, because it's not impacting the other.
yeah,
That still exists. I can still enjoy it in its own universe.
yeah,
So this is
yeah.
its own thing, and
Um,
I wonder if bringing it back together, kind of mashing them together, would be accepted now.
Maybe. I mean, I heard recently too that they were talking about doing something Ghostbuster related on Netflix. I don't know if it was a
Yes,
cartoon,
yes,
another live action,
an
but I
animated
mean that an
something.
animated. Ooh,
Yeah.
animated opens up lots of doors.
Yes, yes. I'm
Animated could
curious where
be
they
a
go.
good way to like almost like I I could almost like see them doing like Ghostbusters version of What If. Like every
Yeah,
episode's like,
that'd be
you
cool.
could tweak around with some of the stuff from the OG,
Hmm.
throw in the extreme for an episode,
Sure.
maybe go over to the 2016 for an episode, and then, your like big crossover at the end of the season could be, like some threat across the What If that like draws in
Yep.
all these different,
Yep.
Crisis on Infinite Ghostbusters kind of thing.
Yeah.
The
Right.
possibilities are endless.
I noticed too, mentioning extreme, that the proton packs in the 2016 look very similar to those extreme Ghostbuster
Hmm
proton packs, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Not sure if
Uh,
ended or not, but
yeah. I almost think, we could, extend the conversation even further to, I mean, like, uh, and again, I don't know if this is like they were like conscious thoughts or it's just like being more open with their like creativity. But another one of the things, rather than just saying like people are upset because of it being all women, you often too get the people that are upset because they think it's diversity for the sake of diversity.
right.
And that happened in 2016, and I might rebut those people and say, okay, well, how long would you say that that's been a thing? Because we got Extreme in '97, and I mean, what was that? We had the goth girl, we had the
Right.
disabled fella,
Right.
we still um, the black driver character was still a black driver character, and
Yes.
then we had the
Mhm.
Hispanic guy who
Yep.
was also a skeptic,
Yeah.
and I mean, like that I would say is a pretty diverse cast, and that was 1997. That was almost 20 years
Yeah.
prior.
Exactly.
So I
100%.
mean, like, was it diversity for diversity's sake, or was
That's a
it
good
just
question.
yeah?
It's always been
Or
there. I just think
mhm.
people haven't really. It just didn't.
They
It was. I think this is like one of those movies that made it feel like it was forced on us for some reason. Like,
yeah, they
and
just you just happen to notice it then.
right, and but the reality of it was Paul Feig is hired to do this because he's hot off of doing Bridesmaids, and he
He's
made
like,
that
all
with,
right. He's like, all right, Melissa McCarthy, come with me.
yeah, and Kristen Wiig. We made that
Oh
together
yeah.
with you.
Mhm.
I want to work with you guys again. Let's do Ghostbusters together. I mean, that was, And Kate McKinnon said her dream job would be to play a Ghostbuster. Ever since she was a kid, that was her thing. And Paul Feig heard that, and he's like, "Oh, let's put you in there."
Mm-hmm.
And he had originally written the role of Patty Tolan, the one that Leslie Jones played, for Melissa McCarthy, but she had
Mm-hmm.
played that part so many times before that they said, "Okay, let's give her
Get
the."
you, yeah, something else.
So he said, "Let's give Leslie Jones that role to really make her shine in that." And so that's kind of so. What I don't think it was like we're intentionally going to make it this way. He really just wanted to work with these same actors again, and this was the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity. And here it was.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you want to think it was a diversity hire thing or not, I think it
Mm-hmm.
really came down to he was really looking to work with these people again. And this was his vehicle he had right there. And he's like, they're perfect for this. They're good comedians. It's a comedy. Here we go. So I think that's really where the inspiration for that's from. Not to say we need women Ghostbusters. Let's make it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I really think it was just that desire to want to work with those particular actors on a project.
I mean, I'm trying to think. I feel like I don't think there's any controversial topics related to this that we haven't brought up. I mean, and
Nope.
this isn't like Howard the Duck. There's no like nude ducks or nude ghosts
No,
or anything like very overt. These are.
right.
I feel like a lot of the controversies from this are, I don't want to say imagined, but they're constructed.
Yeah. Yeah. The kind of like you've built them in your mind, or somebody said fed this into your
I mean,
head of thinking
I
it's
you know what I mean? Like again, harkening back to our first episode. I mean, there are things about that are legitimately controversial, and like I mean, like to see like nude anthropomorphic creatures, and that was PG, wasn't it?
yeah, it was PG.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like things about that,
Mhm.
are even if it doesn't bother me, like I could understand why that might bother
Sure.
somebody else.
Mhm.
But I think the kind of the goal of Ghostbusters 2016 here is, even if people have things about it that they find controversial, I don't really think that there's anything here that's
You don't either. The
legitimate.
most from what I was reading with some other trivia, this
Mm-hmm.
Paul Feig had said the one thing the studio told him they wanted him to remove was the scene where the dean was flipping them off when he fired him.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, um, and they said that they thought that would turn off families. But he says, "Do you remember the first film? There was like fellatio with a ghost and certain things." He says people just remember what they want to remember. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
some things just don't, register. You think of Ghostbusters, it's not like some of they're smoking every other scene, or they're like
Yeah, I don't think that would have turned me
right.
off from like a family perspective. I think I would have seen that and just gone kind of like, I mean, like, granted, I'm watching a movie about people like trying to trap and fight ghosts, but
Mhm.
there's still some aspects of movies that you watch and you expect some level of like reality to them,
Mhm.
and I wouldn't find it very realistic to see somebody like a big professional in a higher education setting, like
Right.
going and like flipping off people that they just fired. It just was like, I see a
Yeah.
scene and I go like, I get that this couldn't happen, but this really couldn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
That
I'm
can,
just I'm thinking of like the president of like one of our local colleges, like going up to an employee and saying like, "You're fired," and like,
yeah.
what I mean? Like, what
Yep.
it just, yeah. But I wouldn't
Yeah.
sit there and go like, "Oh, my family will be so offended by this."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed. That makes sense.
Mm,
But
mm,
yeah, I think we've hit all the points on what this
mm.
what this movie kind of represented, or how it affected or impacted itself in pop culture in
It
almost
it
any point.
it was an experiment, and
Yes.
and again, I think I said it earlier. It like any scientific experiment, right? Like you're looking for a certain result, but even failure teaches you
Mhm.
how to get success.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
it
And
taught them, okay, as much as people, you know want Ghostbusters. They don't want these Ghostbusters. So
Right.
let's give them what they want.
Yeah, I think without this, we wouldn't have gotten Afterlife. Not the way we see it. It
No, we
been,
probably would have gotten another remake
Mhm.
somewhere down the line,
Yep.
but they would have tried to remake it like not exactly the same, but like the way they do remakes where they make the same characters. So it would have been like Venkman stands Zeddemore, like
Yes.
and then in fact, good example of this, and I don't know if this one would ever hit an episode for us, but Starsky and Hutch.
Hmm.
I absolutely love the Owen Wilson
Hmm.
Starsky
That's
and Hutch,
yeah.
and yeah, Ben Stiller. Yep, and that movie, it's like a remake. They have all the characters,
Mhm.
and but then at the very end, you get the cameo from the OGs.
Yep.
That probably would have been the Ghostbusters that we would have gotten
Yep.
without 2016 to grease the wheels.
You're right. I think so. And
They would
if
have like just showed up at the end and just been like, you're like, oh yeah, we're they'll do the same thing. They're selling in the firehouse, and
Mhm.
it's like like four old firemen like show up and be like, yeah, we've seen a
Yeah.
lot of stuff here, and then it's the original four.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely. And I think it would have been to a point too, where if it happened too much later, they would have been a lot older, where they wouldn't have wanted to put the packs back on and
Yeah.
kind of,
In fact, as it is, we were already down a Ghostbuster. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like,
yep,
they had to CGI him.
yep, yeah, true,
So,
true. I think too that after the legacy sequels, like just the last two, if they do a third in that in the Afterlife
hmm
series, I think it's good. I'm okay if they say, hey, we don't need to have Venkman and Stans coming back for a big part again. We can just
I
these
think
characters
they
can
even said themselves the same thing about a third movie. I think like they were already like I thought I read an interview that was like they really kind of want to like pass off to like Paul Rudd and like
I think
McKenna and
I
like
think
and
they're ready
them.
for that.
Yeah,
You've given them, the OGs have been back. We've seen them in action. I think I'm satisfied with it. You
we
know,
know
you
they're around. If
yeah,
they need advice or this or that, or maybe they can finally enjoy their retirement.
yeah, exactly. They can be,
Yeah.
distance themselves from it. And like I could see Winston still being there since he's the guy with the money that's funding the whole thing. Um,
Sure, but
you
even
could,
if he wasn't like there on the ground, it's like okay, go
right.
to Zetamore Industries, and here's your
Yes.
like younger, whatever you want to call it. Here's Winston's son. Here's
Yeah.
Winston's nephew.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. I think at
Your
this point it's time for them to just kind of continue. I even think a good direction would be to franchise it in a way where, like I was saying, Ghostbusters Boston, Ghostbusters Chicago, you
hmm
create a new team there that's just saying, hey, we're now affiliated with the original out of New York, but we're in this city. And whatever adventures they get in there, you could have a ton of
Sure.
that just sort of focus on all these different characters and you could create them. That's why I said you could have had the female Ghostbusters still in that universe if they were in their own franchise in another city instead of saying let's make them overwrite the originals. I think
hmm
that might have been a more acceptable way to do it, was that passing the torch idea, or just kind of linking it somehow instead of saying let's rewrite it. But I get why Columbia did it. They
Yeah.
we tried making a third one. It just wasn't happening. We got to go, we got to start from scratch. Let's see what we can do. But like you
hmm
said, big experiment. And it was bold. Maybe it misfired in spots. And like you said, it gave us what we were hoping for.
And it's I mean, anybody watching this, I would say that it's the type of movie that you should watch yourself. You
Mhm.
know, gauge your own opinion on it.
And I challenge you
It's
to,
not it's not like some unwatchable piece of trash. It's just
it isn't.
you got to watch it and decide for yourself.
It's a good story. It's got great comedy. It's got great characters. The actors are
hmm
are on fire. I mean, Melissa
hmm
McCarthy's great in every scene. Like I said, Leslie Jones, Kate McKinnon, they're fantastic. They work
hmm
really well together, and I really enjoyed watching that. That chemistry they had. It was just so good. Um,
hmm
so I would challenge anybody that even watched it and left the theater saying this was the worst thing I've ever seen and haven't watched it since, to go back and see it. Now
hmm
that you know that the original team is out there and you've seen those legacy sequels, watch this for what it is, just as its own.
I would challenge them to watch Madam Web and then watch this and then tell me, hey, these both came from Sony. You tell me
Yeah.
which is actually a bad film and which one that you may have been brainwashed by the internet on.
I 100% agree. You're right. Yeah, I really
Mm-hmm.
think that this is a
Mm-hmm.
good example of a movie that was tarnished by the internet. Like the internet
Mm-hmm.
before it came out was already against this movie. It
Mm-hmm.
was it had an uphill battle from the beginning. And I did think even the greatest filmmaker would have been
Mm-hmm.
challenged to defeat that amount of adversity that
Yeah.
against it.
It's a yeah, I mean it's a beloved franchise that you were
Mhm.
trying to like add on to. It's the
Yeah,
fans are we're and are very protective.
yeah.
So
We see that in every franchise, whether it's Marvel, Star Wars, Ghostbusters. They're all very, very, very protective of those
mm-hmm.
properties. So any
Mm-hmm.
deviation from what they think it should be they're going to turn on it in a minute. I think we'll visit that with Star Wars, I'm sure, in the future and so yeah. But yeah, I think we've had a pretty good talk on this one. I enjoyed that. But like I said, I really enjoyed watching it again. And I was glad that we did this one because it
hmm
really revisiting it after not seeing it for a while really gave me a huge new perspective on it. And I enjoyed it. I really did.
That's the best thing about movies that you've gone
Mhm.
long stretches of time not watching. You always see something that you didn't see before, or you just like appreciate things in a different way. I remember last year I also saw and I mean this is one of my favorite movies. And I watched it I don't know a dozen or more times. It was The Mask, and
Yes.
last year they had it on the big screen, and I went and
Mhm.
saw it. And again, I watched it a dozen times on the small screen, and seeing it on the big screen, I picked up on things that I'd never seen before. And I'm like, how could
Mhm.
this happen? Like, what, even just going from this size to this size, like I caught things. It happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff too, man.
Hmm.
Good movie.
So,
Yeah, awesome. So yeah,
yep.
cool.
All
So yeah,
right. Well, we'll have to figure out what
yeah,
our next controversial movie is.
yeah, it's gonna be good stuff. So and if people have any suggestions, feel free to post in the comments. Anything you'd be interested in us tackling.
Feel free. Yeah.
Yeah. So for our Clash of Cinema, I'm Kyle Lintz, and with me as always.
Nabil Khan.
Awesome. Thanks for
All
watching.
right.
We see you guys soon.
All right. Take care.